Hey guys, DMS here. Today I have for you the Campfire Andromeda. I've been talking about these for ages and ages and ages, and now we finally have a chance to get this review busted out. I've been talking about these ever since I first heard them, which was in 2017, in February at the New York Can Jam, I believe. Since then, they just completely changed my perspective on IEMs. Now, other things that changed my perspective on IEMs were my customs. Those are still awesome. These are in a very similar price point, actually. I'm going to be doing a comparison video right after this one. So the next video after this on Patreon is going to be the 64A6 versus the Campfire Andromeda, and why these customs and the Andromedas kind of trade blows in certain ways, but I'll get back more into that when that video actually comes out. I don't want to spoil anything. As for this one, let's start like we always do with the build. The Campfire Andromeda, I can't even think of a way these are actually poorly built. They're insanely well built. They have a metal housing. Everything on these is metal. I can't really find anything that is subpar in the build. The original version was a little bit sharp around the edges. Keep that in mind if you're getting an old used unit, but they did round these edges off a little bit more with some more small angles, so they wouldn't really dig into any particular part of your ear. Now, they do have some weight to them, and I know for some people the weight can be an issue, though for me, I tuck these wires in reasonably tight around the top of my ear. I don't have any issues at all with the weight whatsoever. They weigh about the same as my customs do. Comfort isn't really an issue for me, and more than anything, I think the most important thing for comfort is the tips. And I'm using, now the tips that came with them are great. I have a very specific preference for the tips that come with the Simgo EN700 Pro and the EN700 base. So I'm using those tips probably just because they're the best tips for my particular ear shape. I don't think I've ever found some that fit like this. Unfortunately, I don't think Simgo sells these separately. I'm going to email them soon because I think they should, because these are great tips. But the tips that come with Andromeda are absolutely fine. They come with a variety of tips from both some foams, some silicones, and then they come with some from Final Audio that you can actually adjust the angle of, which are also all great tips. I just have a hard time getting things that really grip in my ear well, which is why I like these Simgo tips. I didn't really notice any sonic changes between these and the silicones that come with the Campfire Andromeda, which I think I have some sitting over there, but I can't really reach them because my microphone is in the way. That's okay, though. It was nice when I got a good seal with the foams as well. If you don't get a good seal, you're definitely going to notice a lack of bass response. Now, that's how it is with any IEM. If you don't get a good seal, you're not going to get a good low frequency response and good sub extension. So make sure that whatever you're doing, when you try these out, very loud engine, make sure whatever you do whenever you're trying these out that you do get a solid seal on them. Make sure you find tips that fit you appropriately and are still going to be comfortable. Now, along with that, the cable is built just as well as the headphones. They're connected via a MMCX connector that snaps in and out relatively easily. I don't have any complaints there. It is a silver braided cable. I'd take that if you will. Any way up or down. You might like it, you might not. The carrying case for them is exceptionally well built as well. It is a hard case, a very hard case. You're gonna have a pretty hard time crunching this thing down. The inside is nice and woolly and it zips up. I don't think it's waterproof in any way, shape, or form, but it will definitely wick off some rain if you do get it a little bit wet. And it's also not going to scratch up your headphones, which is nice because I would hate to see this metal get scratched. I think it would be pretty hard to damage the Andromeda considering how insanely well built they are. I mean, they're definitely machined out of, they're definitely up there as a machined IEM, which is, partially accountable for their price. But the rest of their price gets into an interesting point, which I'd like to discuss with the sound. So let's get into that. The Campfire Andromeda is in almost every way the best IEM that I've ever heard. Now, there are some very specific things out there that have outperformed them for 3 times the price, almost. The KFC 1500, I believe it is, which is the electrostatic Shure IEM, is something that I would say very slightly edges out Andromeda. But I think I'd rather have Andromeda over that simply because I don't want to have to carry an electrostatic energizer in my pocket. The 64A6 is close to being on par with Andromeda. They're definitely for different use cases though, and they have very different sound signatures. And Andromeda does something that nothing else seems to do, including a lot of headphones. And this is why I've said many times that Andromeda is the IEM that could make me give up headphones. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to give up headphones. I love headphones too much. I love having big, spacious headphones over my ears, and I love being able to change things out all the time and have different sounds, because I do get bored. It does happen. But Andromeda is good enough that if I didn't want to have a collection, if I just wanted to have one thing, I would just have these. Now, as far as extension on both ends, both bass and treble, the extension is phenomenal. They go pretty insanely high as I can possibly hear, and as low as I can possibly hear. So I have absolutely no complaints there. The sub bass definitely is not heavily emphasized. There's a little bit of a mid bass bump, though it's not anywhere near like the MDR-1A or anything like that. It's a very tame mid bass bump, just enough to give them a little bit of extra low end, and it does add some room, I've noticed, to reverb. Now, the mids seem relatively linear, though there is a little bit of a bump, I believe, after 1K, probably in like the 2K region. There's a little bit of a bump there, and that does enhance vocal presence. And the thing I've noticed about vocal presence in the mid-range is that vocal presence is not concentrated, but it does have a bit of intimacy to it. But the strange thing is it maintains intimacy without sacrificing width. Which I know that sounds a little bit strange, because you think about vocal intimacy, you think about like the 600s where the singer is right here in your ear. But the thing about the Andromeda is that it maintains the feeling that the singer, when they get nice and quiet, because these do have exceptional dynamic range. You get to the quieter parts of the dynamics, singer, it feels like they're almost whispering in her ear, but then they can step back from the microphone and open up their vocals. Cecile Savant is a great example of that. I don't know if any of you have ever listened to her, but Cecile McLaurin Savant, I'll put a link to her music in the video description, is an excellent artist to listen to when you're testing both vocal intimacy and dynamics. And that's one thing that really stood out on these. Whenever she would step back off the microphone to open up her vocals, you could hear it very clearly as she would step back into the room. And with that, the vocal clarity is just brilliant. As with most things I'm going to say about these headphones, you'll notice, I say headphones, IEMs, you'll notice a recurring trend, and that's that I pretty much like almost everything about them. Now, before I get too far into it, I do want to note that if you do have a treble sensitivity, these may in some way not be perfect for you. I am relatively sensitive to treble in some areas, but I still like headphones like the DT1990s, and these are going to peak up a little bit in the 8K region. If that is something that is a deal breaker for you, then Andromeda might not be the IEM for you. But that said, I don't find it to be particularly harsh. I mean, anything if you turn it up loud enough is going to be uncomfortable in its peaks, but I don't have any issues even with my treble sensitivity to the Andromeda's peak at 8K. Mostly because I think that these resolve very well in the highs, and I find that with that, the highs end up coming off more sweet rather than being sibilant. And now I noticed there I did skip over the mid-range a little bit, and that's because I wanted to kind of point out that, yes, the mid-range is exceptionally important. I know it's not the focus on these, but it's definitely not forgotten. The mid-range, the best way I could describe it is it's very textured sounding. If I listen to anything with guitars on it, or anything that is produced in a different era, for example, the song Take Me Home Country Roads, obviously that's not the, that wasn't recorded on, state-of-the-art, Neumann microphones or anything like that, or not to my knowledge at least, but it didn't lose its luster in the mid-range. Everything seemed to really come to life. There was a lot of separation, a lot of very distinct sounds that I could hear in the mid-range that I wouldn't hear on even things like the LCDs that I have sitting over here, which I find to be very surprising, actually. I mean, I guess technically these do cost more than the LCD 2C, and I don't want to take cost as a direct comparison, but I'm going to return to that point in just a little bit, because I find the cost of these actually very interesting when comparing it to other full-size headphones at similar price points. Now, one more thing I want to mention before we get too far out of that, because I do want to talk about Soundstage a little bit more, and a little bit more about imaging as well and separation, but I think the thing that these headphones do best is timbre. And the way that, and you can say how you want, timbre, whatever, which can be defined, well, it can be separated by instrument almost. It seems like a lot of headphones, they can play to the timbre of, say, a trumpet or to the timbre of a piano. But the thing Andromeda does is somehow it plays well to everything. And I'm not quite sure how they managed to pull that off, because if I listen to a piano on something that plays well to vocals, for example, something that plays well to like the timbre of vocals, I will notice that sometimes pianos can sound shouty or harsh. Whereas if I'm listening to something that plays more to the timbre of like a trumpet or brass instruments, everything else might sound, too bright or sibilant or something like that. And somehow these manage to pull it off to where they sound right with everything. And I don't really get that, because normally I would think that that is more of a frequency response thing. And I would think that with your frequency response being set in stone, that you would not be able to play to every instrument equally, yet somehow the Andromeda does it. And because of that, this is how it plays into the next subject, they have exceptionally phenomenal separation. Because every instrument is being played to so well, and because every instrument seems to have its own accord and its own preservation of detail so well, the separation is virtually unmatched in most things that I've heard. I know this sounds hilarious after I just released my last review of the P9 and I was roasting them for the whole video, and this one I just can't stop just sucking up to these headphones because they're so good. And one last thing on the sound before I talk about the price point of these, because I really want to make a point on the price point of these. Let's compare to the A6 for just a second, because I told you I'm going to do a comparison between these two, but I'm just going to put this in very briefly and then I'll elaborate on it in the next video. The A6 has better soundstage, but with that, the Andromeda definitely has very good soundstage. It's not Argon wide, because you definitely still have a lot of that, a lot of the intimate moments with more dynamic vocals, but it is very surprising. And not like in the sense of like extreme width, but in the sense of it sounds like a large driver around ears. For example, one of the big differences between like the Argons and LCDs, which is kind of weird camera angle. One of the big differences, and I know those are some weird headphones to compare because they're so far apart in price, but it's like driver size. When you listen to a large driver, like a large planar, it has a big sound. It sounds like you're listening to a big driver. When you listen to a set of bookshelf speakers versus a set of, 5-foot tall Magnapans, Magnapans have a big sound. It's a large sound coming from large speakers. And what Andromeda manages to pull off isn't having a massive soundstage, it's having a large sound from a small package. These sound like having full-size headphones on, but there's not. It's something small in my ears, but it sounds like I'm putting on a large driver around my ears. They sound like they're much bigger than they actually are, which I find very impressive. Now, I know I've been ranting about how great these are for a little while, but I do want to talk about price, and for those of you who don't like me just like going on and about how good these are, you're going to be disappointed because I'm going to keep doing that. Because a lot of times I like to talk about how I think a lot of things in audio are overpriced. There's definitely diminishing returns. I think almost everything over like $300, you're getting a diminishing return, with the exception of things like DT1990. I think DT1990 is a just great value for its price, even still in the $500 price range, comparing to like the 660S or like anything else before that. But I feel like there's very few headphones over that price point that are not taking a serious diminishing return on cost. Like the LCDs included, or the 800s, or a lot of hi-fi men, or just anything that's up in that price range, especially over $1,000. And Andromeda is one of the few things I've heard that when I see these are over $1,000, I hear them and think, wow, that's actually worth it. And here's another thing to gauge this scale by. For not everyone is going to listen to something like that and say, wow, this is worth it. Which is why audio in itself is a niche. There's going to be plenty of people who look at a pair of LCDs and think, wow, that costs, as much as a cheap car on Craigslist, $1,000 car. Or someone might say, hey, I could buy a motorcycle for the price of these IEMs. And it really comes down to what makes you happy. Me personally, at the end of the day, I love to just sit there and listen to music. That's how I unwind. That's how I take my leisure time. I'll either sit on my porch or go out somewhere and take pictures of space and put in my headphones and chill out under the stars for a few hours and listen to music. For me, that makes it an absolutely worthy investment. And for something that I could easily see myself using for, a decade or more, why not? Absolutely, why not? I think that, and I'm not going to say this about everything because I find it really hard to justify for a lot of things over this price point. And even to me myself, I'm not well off financially. $1,000 is a lot of money. But for something that is this exceptional in every way, I think that they are absolutely to the dollar worth their price. Now, one last thing before I wrap this up is power. They are very, very, very easy to power. You can power them off a phone. You don't need a big amp. Even on amps like the, if I use them on the JDS Labs, the EL amp, I would have to set it on low gain, and I could only barely turn the volume up before they became very, very loud. I find these are like the HD800 in the sense that they are very amp transparent. So anything you put these on, if there are negative traits to that amplifier, you are going to hear those negative traits in these headphones. Like if I use these on Magni, I'm going to hear glare, which is unfortunate. If I hear these on the IDST Black Label, the low end gets a little bit stronger. If I hear these on my on like the Nexus, I listened to them on the Nexus 6P and was hearing this weird DAC noise where I could tell it wasn't decoding things very well. So actually what's funny enough is the thing I listen to them the most on is this, which is just an S7 Edge, or on the M1S, I believe it is. Let me check that real quick. Yeah, my little the OWN M1S DAP. So I wouldn't worry too much about source. I just wouldn't give them too much power. I know with some phones and some things, you're probably going to hear hissing if you give them something that's just way too powerful. So just be mindful that these don't take hardly anything to drive. And I think that about wraps it up. So guys, thank you for watching this video. If you like this video, please leave a like down below and a comment letting me know what you want to see in the future. Plus, if you want to see more videos like this, don't forget to stick around and subscribe. And if you want early access to those videos, you can check them out the Patreon linked in the video description, where you'll also get access to the live streamed podcast every single week. But until the next one, guys, peace.